The rifle shot echoed across the dusty main street of Wichita, Kansas, and Helena Everett knew her husband had just killed another man over a card game, which meant she would spend another night alone while he celebrated in the saloon, and she would wake to find bloodstains on his shirt that she would scrub until her knuckles bled. It was August of 1878, and the heat pressed down on the prairie town like a heavy hand, making everything shimmer in waves that distorted the horizon. Helena stood at the window of the two-story house that belonged to her husband, Marcus Whitley, watching the crowd gather outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. She was 22 years old, and she had been married for 3 years to a man who treated her like a possession he kept locked away, only bringing her out when he needed to show the town what a respectable wife he had acquired. The arrangement had been her father's doing. Gerald Everett had owed Marcus a substantial sum of money from failed cattle speculation, and rather than face ruin or worse, he had offered his daughter as payment for the debt. Helena had been 19, fresh from finishing school in St. Louis, full of dreams about finding love and building a life with a good man who would cherish her. Instead, she found herself bound to Marcus Whitley, a man 15 years her senior who owned half the businesses in Wichita and ruled the town through fear and money. She turned away from the window, her hands trembling as she moved through the house that had never felt like a home. The walls were covered in expensive wallpaper imported from back east. The furniture was all dark mahogany and velvet, but none of it could mask the coldness that permeated every room. Marcus had never raised a hand to her, but his indifference cut deeper than any physical wound. He spoke to her only to issue instructions or criticisms, and he spent his nights drinking and gambling, often not returning until dawn. Helena had learned to fill her days with small tasks that kept her mind occupied. She tended the small garden behind the house, read books she borrowed from the minister's wife, and volunteered at the church whenever Marcus allowed it. But beneath the surface of her carefully maintained composure, desperation grew like a weed choking out everything else. She was trapped in a life that stretched ahead of her with no hope of change, no possibility of escape. The front door slammed open, and Helena's breath caught in her throat. But it was not Marcus who entered. Instead, she heard the heavy footsteps of Samuel, Marcus's business partner and the closest thing her husband had to a friend. She stepped into the hallway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Whitley," Samuel said, removing his hat. His face was grim. "There has been an incident. Marcus shot a man who accused him of cheating. The sheriff took him into custody, but he will be out by morning. Marcus wanted me to tell you not to wait up." Helena nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Thank you for bringing word, Mr. Patterson." Samuel hesitated, his eyes full of something that might have been pity. "Madam, if you ever need anything, assistance of any kind, I hope you know you can ask." "That's very kind," Helena said softly, "but I have everything I need." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but Samuel simply nodded and left, pulling the door closed behind him. Helena stood in the empty hallway, listening to the silence of the house and felt the walls closing in around her. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the parlor with a lamp burning low, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. By the time dawn broke over Wichita, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she had made a decision. She could not live like this anymore. Somehow, someway, she would find a way out of this arrangement, even if it meant risking everything. The morning brought suffocating heat that promised another scorching day. Helena dressed carefully in a simple cotton dress and bonnet, then slipped out of the house before Marcus could return. She walked quickly through the awakening town, nodding to the few people she passed, but not stopping to talk. Her destination was the general store, where she could buy supplies and perhaps hear news from travelers passing through. The store was dim and cool inside, smelling of leather and coffee and dried goods. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, greeted her with his usual friendly smile. "Morning, Mrs. Whitley. What can I do for you today?" "I need some thread and fabric," Helena said, moving toward the bolts of cloth stacked against the wall. As she examined the options, she became aware of another presence in the store. She glanced up and saw a man standing near the counter, tall and lean with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore dusty trail clothes and had a quiet confidence about him that seemed at odds with the weariness in his blue eyes. He caught her looking and touched the brim of his hat politely. "Madam." Helena felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly looked back at the fabric. She was not accustomed to speaking with strange men, and Marcus had made it clear that he expected her to maintain proper distance from everyone. "That will be 3 yards of the blue calico," she told Mr. Henderson, who began measuring and cutting the fabric. The stranger was talking to the proprietor in a low voice. "I am looking for work. Heard there might be ranches hiring in the area." "Could be," Mr. Henderson said. "The Johnson spread might need hands, but most folks around here work for Marcus Whitley in some capacity. He owns the biggest ranch, plus the saloon, the hotel, and shares in the bank." "I prefer to work for myself when I can," the stranger said, and Helena heard something in his tone that made her look up again. There was a quiet dignity in his words, an independence that she recognized because it was something she had lost. "Name is Lucas Irving," the man continued. "I am a good hand with cattle and horses, and I know how to work hard." "I will ask around," Mr. Henderson promised. "Where you staying?" "Got a room at the boarding house for now." Helena paid for her purchases and turned to leave, but as she passed Lucas Irving, their eyes met for just a moment. In that brief glance, she saw something that made her heart skip. Kindness, perhaps, or understanding, or simply the recognition of one lonely soul seeing another. Then the moment passed, and she hurried out into the bright morning, but she could not stop thinking about the stranger as she walked home. There had been something different about him, something that set him apart from the rough men who typically drifted through Wichita. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thoughts. It was foolish and dangerous to let her mind wander down such paths. Marcus returned home that afternoon, his clothes rumpled and smelling of whiskey. He barely acknowledged Helena's presence, simply grunting when she offered him coffee and a late breakfast. He ate in silence, then retired to his study to sleep off the previous night's excesses. Helena found herself standing at the kitchen window again, staring out at the dusty yard and the empty prairie beyond. The feeling of being trapped intensified until she thought she might scream. She had to get out, even if just for a few hours. Making a quick decision, she grabbed her bonnet and basket and slipped out the back door. She walked toward the edge of town where a small creek provided a shady refuge from the heat. It was a place she visited sometimes when she needed to think, to feel something other than the suffocating despair that threatened to overwhelm her. The water burbled over smooth stones, and cottonwood trees provided blessed shade. Helena sat on the bank, removing her bonnet and letting the breeze cool her face. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine a different life, one where she was free to make her own choices, to go where she pleased, to perhaps even find someone who could love her the way she had once dreamed of being loved. Beautiful spot. Helena's eyes flew open and she scrambled to her feet, her heart racing. Lucas Irving stood a few yards away, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I apologize for startling you, madam. I did not mean to intrude on your solitude. What are you doing here?" Helena asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "Taking a walk, same as you, I expect. The boarding house is stuffy in this heat." He stayed where he was, making no move to come closer. "I can leave if you prefer." Helena knew she should tell him to go, that it was improper for her to be alone with a strange man, but something in her rebelled against the constraints that had bound her for so long. "You may stay," she heard herself say. "The creek belongs to everyone." Lucas moved to a spot several feet away and sat on a fallen log, maintaining a respectful distance. For several minutes, neither spoke. Helena was acutely aware of his presence, of the way he seemed comfortable with silence, not rushing to fill it with meaningless chatter. "You are new to Wichita," she finally said, not quite a question. "Arrived yesterday. Been working ranches through Texas and Oklahoma, but I have been thinking it is time to settle somewhere, maybe start saving toward my own place eventually." "That sounds like a good dream. What about you?" Lucas asked, then seemed to realize the presumption of the question. "Forgive me, I am being too familiar." "No, it is all right." Helena sat back down, keeping her eyes on the water. I am Helena Everett. That is, I was Helena Everett. Now I am Mrs. Whitley. She heard the bitterness in her own voice and was ashamed of it, but Lucas simply nodded as if he understood more than she had said. The man who owns half the town. Yes. Another silence fell, but this one was weighted with unspoken understanding. Helena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this stranger, would not reveal the depths of her unhappiness. I was married once, Lucas said quietly, and Helena looked at him in surprise. Her name was Sarah. We met in San Antonio, got married when I was 20 and she was 18. We had 2 years together before the fever took her. I am so sorry, Helena whispered. It was 4 years ago now. I have been drifting ever since, working here and there, never staying anywhere too long. I think part of me was afraid to stop moving, afraid that if I did, the grief would catch up with me. He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his fingers. But lately, I have been thinking that maybe it is time to build something again, to have roots somewhere. Helena understood what he was not saying. She heard the loneliness in his words, the yearning for connection that mirrored her own. It was dangerous, this recognition, this feeling of kinship with a man she had just met. But it was also the first real thing she had felt in years. I should go back, she said reluctantly, rising to her feet. My husband will wonder where I am. Lucas stood as well. Of course, it was a pleasure speaking with you, Mrs. Whitley. Helena, she said impulsively. When we are alone, you may call me Helena. Something flickered in his blue eyes, surprise mixed with something warmer. Lucas, he replied. They walked back toward town together but separated before they reached the main street, understanding without words that they needed to be careful. Helena's heart was pounding as she made her way home, and she felt more alive than she had in 3 years. Over the following weeks, Helena found excuses to visit the creek, and more often than not, Lucas was there. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their regrets. Helena learned that Lucas had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, that he loved horses and could spend hours working with a difficult animal until trust was established. He told her about the places he had seen, the vast stretches of open prairie, the rough cow towns, and the honest people trying to build lives in a hard land in turn. Helena found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told Lucas about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father's desperation that had led to her arranged marriage. She did not speak directly about her unhappiness with Marcus, but Lucas was perceptive enough to understand. You deserve better, he said one afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching dragonflies skim over the water. What I deserve and what I have are very different things, Helena replied. I made vows, Lucas. Before God and the church, I cannot simply walk away. Even if those vows are killing you, the question hung in the air between them. Helena had no answer because she knew he was right. She was dying inside a little more each day, withering like a plant denied sun and water. I think about leaving, she admitted in a whisper. I think about just walking out of that house and never looking back. But where would I go? What would I do? I have no money of my own, no skills that could earn me a living, and Marcus would come after me. He considers me his property, something he paid for fair and square. Lucas's jaw tightened. No human being should be treated as property. I agree, but the law does not. They sat in troubled silence, both aware that they were approaching dangerous territory. The feelings growing between them were undeniable, but acting on them would have consequences neither could afford. Lucas had found work with a smaller ranch outside of town, which meant he was away during the days but back in Wichita most evenings. He was careful never to approach Helena in public, never to give anyone reason to gossip. But their meetings by the creek continued, becoming the bright spot in Helena's otherwise gray existence. Then, one evening in late September, everything changed. Helena arrived at the creek to find Lucas pacing anxiously. His face was troubled, and when he saw her, he immediately came to her side. What is wrong? Helena asked, alarmed. I heard something in town today. Marcus Whitley is planning to expand his operations into Oklahoma territory. He is talking about sending crews to establish a new ranch there, and he intends to take you with him. Helena felt the blood drain from her face. No, he cannot. I will not go. I do not think he is asking your permission, Helena. She sank onto the creek bank, her mind racing. Oklahoma Territory was even more isolated than Wichita, even more lawless. If Marcus took her there, any hope of escape would be lost. She would be completely at his mercy, miles from anyone who might help her. What am I going to do? She whispered. Lucas knelt beside her, and for the first time he took her hand in his. His palm was rough and warm, and Helena felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. Come with me, he said urgently. Let me help you get away from here. We can head west to Colorado or California. You can get a divorce there, start a new life. Lucas, you do not understand. Marcus will not let me go. He will hunt me down, and when he finds me, he will kill you and drag me back. Then we will make sure he does not find us. Helena, I cannot stand by and watch you be taken somewhere even worse than here. I cannot let you disappear into that territory knowing what your life will be. Helena looked into his eyes and saw not just concern but something deeper. Lucas, I cannot ask you to throw away your life for me. You barely know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know that you are kind and brave and that you deserve a chance at happiness. I know that when I am with you, I feel alive again in a way I have not since Sarah died, and I know that if you get on that wagon to Oklahoma, I will regret it for the rest of my life. Tears spilled down Helena's cheeks. I have feelings for you too. I have been trying to deny them, trying to pretend that these meetings were just innocent friendship, but I cannot lie to myself anymore. I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day in the general store. Lucas reached up and gently wiped away her tears. Then come with me. Let me offer you a fresh start, a chance to be free. I am not a rich man, Helena. I cannot give you fine houses or fancy dresses, but I can promise that I will treat you with respect and care and that I will do everything in my power to make you happy. Helena's mind was spinning. Every rational part of her screamed that this was madness, that running away would only make things worse. But her heart, that part of her that had been locked away for so long, was singing with hope and possibility. When, she asked, tomorrow night. Marcus will be at the saloon. He always is on Fridays. Pack only what you can carry in a small bag, things that matter to you but nothing too obvious. I will have horses ready. We will head north first, then cut west once we are far enough away. I have some money saved, enough to get us started. If we do this, if I leave with you, there is no going back. Marcus will make sure of that. He will tell everyone I am a fallen woman, that I abandoned my vows. My reputation will be destroyed. Lucas squeezed her hand. Your reputation here, perhaps, but where we are going, no one will know us. We can start fresh, be whoever we want to be. And Helena, I do not care what anyone says about you. I know who you are, and that is all that matters to me. Helena took a shaky breath. This was the moment. She could choose safety, such as it was, and continue in her miserable existence. Or she could choose hope, risk everything for a chance at something real. All right, she whispered. Tomorrow night, I will be ready. Lucas exhaled, and she realized he had been holding his breath. Meet me here at midnight. I will have everything prepared. They sat together for a long moment, hands clasped, both aware that they had just set in motion events that would change their lives forever. Then, reluctantly, they parted, and Helena walked back to the house that had been her prison, knowing it was for the last time. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Helena went through her usual routines, preparing meals that Marcus barely acknowledged, tidying rooms that were already spotless. Every moment, she was aware of the small bag hidden under her bed, packed with a few changes of clothes, her mother's locket, and a book of poetry that had been a gift from her grandmother. Marcus was in a foul mood, snapping at her over trivial matters. At dinner, he informed her that they would indeed be leaving for Oklahoma Territory in 2 weeks. The new operation will be profitable, he said, cutting into his steak with aggressive motions. And it will be good for you to be away from town. You spend too much time wandering around by yourself. In Oklahoma, you will be where I can keep a proper eye on you. Helena kept her eyes on her plate, not trusting herself to speak. If Marcus suspected anything, if he had any inkling of her plans, everything would fall apart. You will need to be ready to travel. Pack appropriately. It will be rougher out there, at least at first. Yes, Marcus, Helena said quietly. He grunted and returned his attention to his meal. After dinner, he left for the saloon as expected, and Helena was alone. She paced through the house, her nerves stretched tight. Every sound made her jump, every shadow seemed threatening. She kept checking the small pocket watch that had belonged to her father, watching the hands creep toward midnight with painful slowness. At 11:30, she changed into her simplest dress and sturdy boots. She retrieved the bag from under the bed and took one last look around the room that had been hers for 3 years. She felt no sadness at leaving it, only a fierce joy at the thought of never returning. She slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows as she made her way through town. The saloon was loud with laughter and music, and she saw light spilling from the windows. Marcus was in there somewhere, drinking and gambling, completely unaware that his wife was about to disappear from his life. The walk to the creek seemed to take forever, but finally she emerged from the trees to find Lucas waiting. He had 2 horses saddled and ready, along with supplies tied to the saddles. When he saw her, relief flooded his face. "I was afraid you might change your mind," he admitted. "I almost did about a dozen times," Helena said, trying to smile despite her fear. "But then I remembered what my alternative was, and I knew I had to take this chance." Lucas helped her onto one of the horses, securing her bag to the saddle. Then he mounted his own horse and looked at her in the moonlight. "Are you ready?" Helena took a deep breath and nodded. "I am ready." They rode out of Wichita, heading north, keeping to a steady pace that would eat up miles without exhausting the horses. Helena did not look back. She kept her eyes forward, focused on Lucas's broad shoulders ahead of her, on the stars wheeling overhead, on the vast darkness of the prairie that suddenly seemed like freedom rather than emptiness. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. As dawn broke, painting the sky in brilliant shades of rose and gold, Lucas led them off the main trail to a sheltered spot near a small stream. They dismounted, and Helena felt her legs trembling from the long ride. "We will rest here for a few hours," Lucas said, unsaddling the horses and leading them to water. "It is not safe to ride in full daylight until we are farther away. Someone might recognize us." Helena sank onto the grass, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading, leaving her shaky and uncertain. Lucas spread out blankets and offered her some jerky and hardtack from his supplies. "I know it is not much," he apologized. "It is perfect," Helena said, and meant it. She was eating simple trail food in the middle of nowhere, having just abandoned her life, but she felt more at peace than she had in years. Lucas sat beside her, close but not touching. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Helena admitted. "And more alive than I have felt since I was 19 years old." He smiled at that, and Helena found herself smiling back. They ate in companionable silence, listening to the birds singing in the trees and the gentle sound of the stream. When they finished, Lucas suggested they try to sleep. "I will keep watch," he said. "You rest. We have a long way to go tonight." Helena lay down on the blanket, expecting to be too anxious to sleep, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. When she woke several hours later, the sun was high overhead, and Lucas was still sitting watch, though his eyes were heavy with tiredness. "You should have woken me to take a turn," Helena said, sitting up. "I am all right. Besides, I wanted to make sure you got proper rest. Tonight will be harder, and the nights after that even more so. How long do you think it will take us to get somewhere safe? If we push hard, we can reach Colorado in 3 weeks, maybe less. Once we cross the border, we should be far enough away that Marcus will have trouble tracking us. He will try, though. He will see it as a personal insult, me leaving him." Lucas's expression hardened. "Let him try. By the time he figures out where we have gone, we will be long gone and impossible to trace." They spent the rest of the day resting and preparing for another night of travel. As dusk fell, they saddled up and rode out again, this time heading northwest. Lucas seemed to have an unerring sense of direction, navigating by stars and landmarks that Helena could barely see in the darkness. For days, they followed this pattern, riding by night and hiding during the day. They rationed their supplies carefully, occasionally stopping at remote homesteads where Lucas would buy provisions, always careful to give false names and vague destinations. Helena learned to sleep light and ride long, her body adapting to the harsh demands of their flight. On the 5th night, they came across a small town. Lucas insisted they skirt around it rather than passing through, even though it would add hours to their journey. As they circled the settlement, Helena saw lights in windows and heard the distant sound of a piano, and she felt a pang of longing for normal life, for the simple comfort of four walls and a roof. "Someday soon," Lucas said, as if reading her thoughts. "Someday soon we will have a place to rest, somewhere we can stop running." They pressed on. The land was changing around them, becoming more rugged as they climbed into higher elevations. The nights grew colder, and Helena was grateful for the extra blanket Lucas had brought. They were both exhausted, pushed beyond the limits of endurance, but neither suggested stopping for more than a few hours at a time. It was on the seventh night that they saw riders behind them. Lucas spotted them first, his body going tense as he stared back at the horizon where dust rose in the moonlight. "Someone is following us," he said quietly. "Could be anyone, but we cannot take chances." They pushed the horses harder, urging them into a gallop that ate up ground but also risked injury on the rough terrain. Helena's heart pounded as she rode, expecting at any moment to hear gunshots or shouts behind them. But gradually, the pursuing riders fell back, either losing the trail or giving up the chase. They did not stop to celebrate. Instead, they kept moving, varying their direction, doubling back at times to confuse anyone who might be tracking them. By the time dawn broke, they were both reeling with exhaustion, and the horses were near collapse. Lucas led them to a rocky outcropping that offered some shelter and concealment. They tended to the horses first, rubbing them down and making sure they had food and water. Only then did Lucas and Helena collapse onto the hard ground. "That was too close," Helena whispered, her voice shaking. "I know, but we lost them, and every mile we travel makes it less likely Marcus can find us." Helena wanted to believe him, but fear had taken root in her chest. She kept imagining Marcus riding up with armed men, dragging her back to Wichita, punishing her in ways she did not want to contemplate. And Lucas, what would Marcus do to Lucas? The thought made her sick. "Maybe I should go back," she said suddenly. "Maybe if I return now, tell him I was confused, that I made a mistake, he will not come after you." Lucas sat up and took her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Helena, listen to me, you cannot go back. Even if Marcus did not harm you for leaving, which I do not believe for a moment, you would be condemning yourself to a lifetime of misery. And I am not going to let you sacrifice yourself to protect me. We are in this together now, for better or worse. But you could die because of me. I could not bear that, and I could not bear knowing I let you go back to that life." His blue eyes were fierce in the dawn light. "Helena, I know we have not known each other long. I know this is all happening fast and in the worst possible circumstances, but I need you to understand something. I care about you, deeply, more than I have cared about anyone since Sarah. You are not a burden to me. You are the reason I have hope again." Helena felt tears streaming down her face. "I care about you too, so much that it terrifies me." Lucas pulled her into his arms, and Helena buried her face against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They held each other as the sun rose, drawing strength and comfort from the embrace. "We are going to make it," Lucas said softly. "I promise you, we are going to make it to safety, and then we are going to build a life together. A real life, the kind you have been dreaming about." Helena wanted desperately to believe him. She pulled back and looked up at his face, seeing the determination there, the fierce protectiveness. And she realized that somewhere along this desperate flight, her feelings for Lucas had deepened into something powerful and unshakable. "I love you," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Lucas's expression softened. "I love you too, Helena. I think I started falling for you that day by the creek when you told me your dreams. I want to give you those dreams. I want to give you everything." He leaned down and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion. Helena kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the world seemed brighter somehow, more full of possibility. They rested for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch, then continued their journey. As they traveled, they began to notice changes in the landscape. The flat prairie was giving way to rolling hills, and in the distance, mountains rose against the sky. The air was thinner, crisper, carrying the scent of pine. "Colorado," Lucas said with satisfaction. "We are getting close." 2 days later, they crossed into Colorado territory. Lucas did not trust that they were truly safe yet, so they kept moving, heading deeper into the mountains. They passed through small mining towns where no one asked questions, where strangers were common and anonymity was easy to maintain. Finally, 3 weeks after fleeing Wichita, they arrived in a town called Silver Creek, nestled in a valley surrounded by tall pines and snow-capped peaks. It was a young settlement, full of miners and merchants and people looking to start fresh, just like them. Lucas rented a room at a boarding house run by a kindly widow named Mrs. Carson. He explained that he and his wife were traveling west and needed a place to rest for a while. Mrs. Carson asked no questions, simply showed them to a clean room with a large bed and a window overlooking the mountains. When they were alone, Helena looked around the simple room and felt tears of relief and joy spilling down her cheeks. "We made it," she whispered. "We actually made it." Lucas wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I told you we would. And now we can start planning our future." Over the next few days, they began to put down tentative roots. Lucas found work at a nearby ranch that was looking for experienced hands. The pay was decent, and the owner, a gruff but fair man named Jack Morrison, seemed impressed with Lucas's skills. Helena, meanwhile, began helping Mrs. Carson around the boarding house, earning a small wage and learning the rhythms of this new place. At night, lying in bed together in the darkness, they would talk about their dreams. Lucas wanted to save enough money to buy his own land, start a small ranch where he could raise horses. Helena talked about having a home of her own, a place where she could plant a garden and maybe, someday, raise children in freedom and love. "We should get married properly," Lucas said one night. "I know we have been acting as man and wife, but I want to do it right, with a preacher and vows that mean something." Helena turned to face him in the darkness. "I am still legally married to Marcus. A divorce will take time, and I do not even know how to begin that process." "We will figure it out. There is a lawyer in town. We can talk to him, see what our options are." The next day, they visited the lawyer, a young man named David Chen who had moved to Colorado from San Francisco. He listened to Helena's story with compassion and then explained the complicated process of obtaining a divorce. "It will take at least a year, maybe longer," he said. "You will need to establish residency here and you will need grounds for divorce: abandonment, cruelty, or infidelity. From what you have told me, you could argue cruelty and emotional abuse. What if my husband finds me before the divorce is final?" Helena asked, voicing her greatest fear. "Legally, he still has rights as your husband. He could try to force you to return with him. However, Colorado territory has more progressive views on women's rights than many places. If you can prove that returning to him would put you in danger, a judge might grant you protection." It was not the complete reassurance Helena wanted, but it was something. She filed the necessary papers, knowing that doing so would create a public record that Marcus could potentially find. But she could not live in limbo forever, and she trusted that by the time the legal process worked its way through the system, they would be established enough in Silver Creek to resist any attempts to separate them. As autumn deepened and the first snows dusted the peaks, Helena and Lucas settled into their new life. They moved from the boarding house into a small cabin on the Morrison Ranch, part of Lucas's wages. It was humble, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and a covered porch, but to Helena, it was paradise. She threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains from fabric she bought at the general store, planting herbs in pots that she kept on the windowsills, cooking meals on the cast iron stove that filled the cabin with warmth and delicious smells. Lucas would come home each evening exhausted from long days working with horses and cattle, and Helena would have dinner waiting, and they would sit together and talk about their day, and it was everything she had dreamed of and more. They made friends in Silver Creek. Mrs. Carson remained a motherly presence, often inviting them to Sunday dinners. Jack Morrison and his wife, Ruth, became close companions, and Ruth was especially kind to Helena, sensing perhaps that she had come from a difficult situation. The local preacher, Reverend Thomas, and his wife welcomed them into the small church community, never prying but always offering support. One Sunday after services, Reverend Thomas pulled Lucas and Helena aside. "I know you two have not had a formal ceremony," he said gently. "And I understand there are complications with Mrs. Whitley's previous marriage. But I want you to know that in the eyes of God and this community, you are recognized as husband and wife. When the legal matters are resolved, I would be honored to perform a proper ceremony for you." Helena felt tears of gratitude stinging her eyes. "Thank you, Reverend. That means more than you know." Winter came to the mountains with a vengeance, burying Silver Creek under feet of snow. The work at the ranch slowed, and Lucas spent more time at the cabin, chopping wood and making repairs. Helena learned to navigate the deep snow, bundling up in layers to make trips to the general store or to visit Ruth Morrison. It was during one of these visits, in late January, that Ruth looked at Helena with knowing eyes. "Helena, dear, are you feeling well? You look a bit pale." "I have been tired lately," Helena admitted, "and certain smells have been bothering me. I thought perhaps I was coming down with something." Ruth smiled gently. "My dear, I think you might be expecting a baby." Helena stared at her, the words not quite processing. Then, as understanding dawned, she felt a mixture of joy and terror. A baby. She and Lucas were going to have a baby, but she was still legally married to Marcus. What would that mean for the child? She hurried home through the snow, her mind racing. When Lucas returned that evening, she was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. He immediately sensed something was wrong. "Helena, what is it?" "I think I am with child," she said quietly. "Ruth Morrison believes I am showing the signs." Lucas knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "That is wonderful news, is it not? I am still married to Marcus. Legally, any child I bear would be considered his. Lucas, what are we going to do?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "That is not going to happen. This is our child, yours and mine. We will protect him or her, no matter what it takes." "But the law is not always just a right. Helena, we have already broken laws by running away together. We will break more if we have to. No child of ours is going to be claimed by Marcus Whitley." His fierce determination eased some of Helena's fear. She leaned into his embrace, feeling his strength and love surrounding her. "I am frightened," she admitted, "but I am also happy. I want this baby, Lucas. I want to have a family with you. We will have that family, I promise you." Over the following weeks, as Helena's pregnancy became more apparent, they consulted again with David Chen. The lawyer was concerned about the legal implications but determined to help. "The divorce is proceeding, but it will not be final for several more months. When the child is born, we can claim that you and Lucas had married in good faith, believing your previous marriage to be invalid due to coercion. It is a legal gray area, but judges here in Colorado tend to be sympathetic to women in your situation. It was not a perfect solution, but it was hope." Helena focused on staying healthy, on preparing for the baby's arrival. Ruth Morrison was invaluable, sharing her experience from raising 3 children of her own. She taught Helena how to sew baby clothes, how to prepare the simple remedies that would be needed, how to manage the aches and discomforts of pregnancy. Spring came late to the mountains, but when it arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted into rushing streams, wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the world seemed fresh and new. Lucas had saved enough money to buy a few acres of land near the Morrison Ranch, and he spent his free time clearing it, planning for the future. "By next year, we will have our own place," he told Helena one evening as they walked the property together. "A house, a barn, space for horses, and maybe some cattle. Our child will grow up here with room to run and explore." Helena could picture it so clearly, and her heart swelled with love and gratitude. This man had given her everything, had risked everything for her, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice in running away with him. In late May, Helena went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Ruth Morrison and Mrs. Carson attended her while Lucas paced outside the cabin, his face drawn with worry. Finally, as evening fell, a baby's cry pierced the air. Ruth emerged, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she told Lucas. "A healthy, strong boy, and Helena is exhausted but doing well." Lucas rushed inside to find Helena propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat, cradling a tiny bundle. When she looked up at him, her face was radiant with joy and love. "Meet your son," she whispered. Lucas approached carefully, as if afraid he might break something. When he saw the baby's small face, red and wrinkled and perfect, his eyes filled with tears. "He is beautiful. You are both beautiful." They named him James after Lucas's father. James Irving, they decided, giving him Lucas's surname regardless of what the law might say. He was their son, born of their love, and nothing would change that. The weeks after James's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Helena learned the rhythms of caring for an infant, the constant cycle of feeding and changing and soothing. Lucas was an attentive father, taking over whenever he could to give Helena rest, walking the floor with James in his arms when the baby was fussy. The community of Silver Creek embraced the new family. Neighbors brought food and gifts, and no one questioned the circumstances of James's birth. In this rough frontier town, people were more concerned with character than with legal technicalities. Summer passed in a blur of long days and short nights. Lucas continued working and building, and by autumn, he had constructed a small barn on their property and fenced several acres. He bought 2 mares, the beginning of what he hoped would eventually be a breeding operation. It was in October, when James was 4 months old, that David Chen brought them the news they had been hoping for. The divorce had been finalized. Helena was legally free from Marcus Whitley. "I have to tell you," David said, his expression serious, "there was an inquiry from Kansas." A lawyer representing Mr. Whitley contacted the court, trying to halt the proceedings. But the judge ruled in your favor, citing evidence of emotional cruelty and abandonment. "Mr. Whitley has no legal claim on you anymore." Helena felt as if a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Did the lawyer mention anything about him coming here? Does Marcus know where I am?" "The inquiry revealed that you were somewhere in Colorado territory, but no specific location was mentioned. However, I think you should remain cautious. A man like Whitley does not like to lose." Despite the warning, Helena felt liberated. She was truly free now, able to start her life over without the shadow of her past hanging over her. 2 weeks later, on a beautiful October afternoon with golden aspen leaves falling like coins around them, Helena and Lucas were married in a simple ceremony at the Silver Creek Church. Reverend Thomas officiated, and the whole town seemed to turn out to celebrate with them. Helena wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that Ruth had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Lucas had picked that morning. As she stood before the preacher, holding Lucas's hands and looking into his eyes, she felt overwhelming gratitude. This man had saved her, had offered her escape when she had no hope, had given her a fresh start and more love than she had ever imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered as they exchanged vows. "Thank you for giving me my life back." "I love you too," Lucas replied. "And I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this choice." They kissed as husband and wife, truly and legally married at last, and the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Afterward, there was a celebration at the Morrison Ranch, with music and dancing and food. Helena danced with Lucas under the stars, baby James sleeping peacefully in Mrs. Carson's arms, and she felt complete happiness for the first time in her life. The years that followed were not always easy. Ranching was hard work, and there were setbacks, harsh winters when they lost livestock, dry summers when the hay crop failed. But Helena and Lucas faced every challenge together, supporting each other, building their dream piece by piece. Their family grew. 2 years after James was born, Helena gave birth to a daughter they named Emma. She had Helena's dark hair and Lucas's blue eyes, and she was bright and fearless from the start. Then, 3 years later, came another son, Daniel, who was quiet and thoughtful, content to observe the world around him. Lucas built them a proper house, a sturdy 2-story structure with a big kitchen and bedrooms for all the children. Helena filled it with love and laughter, creating the warm home she had always dreamed of. She planted extensive gardens, kept chickens, and became known in Silver Creek for her excellent preserves and baked goods. The horse breeding operation that Lucas had started grew into a successful business. He had a gift for working with difficult animals, and word spread about the quality of the horses from the Irving Ranch. Buyers came from all over Colorado territory to purchase his stock, As the children grew, Helena taught them to read and write, using the books she accumulated over the years. James showed an early talent for working with horses, following his father around the ranch from the time he could walk. Emma was adventurous and independent, constantly exploring the mountains and bringing home interesting rocks and plants. Daniel was the peacemaker, always trying to help settle disputes between his siblings. Helena often thought about her life in Wichita, but it seemed like a distant dream now, something that had happened to someone else. She occasionally wondered what had become of Marcus, but she never made inquiries. That part of her life was closed, and she had no desire to reopen it. It was not until the spring of 1889, 11 years after they had fled Wichita, that the past intruded on their present. Lucas came home one day with troubling news. He had been in town and had overheard two men talking in the saloon. They were from Kansas, passing through on their way to Denver, and they had mentioned Marcus Whitley. "What did they say?" Helena asked, her heart beginning to pound. "That he died last year, some kind of fever. His business empire fell apart after he passed. Apparently he had debts no one knew about." Helena sank into a chair, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, certainly, that Marcus could never threaten them now. But also a kind of sadness for the waste of it all, for the years he had spent accumulating wealth and power that had ultimately meant nothing. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, kneeling beside her. "Yes, it is strange hearing that he is gone. I suppose part of me has always been waiting for him to show up to try to take me back or hurt you, and now that can never happen. We are safe. We have always been safe here, but now there is no doubt." Helena looked around her kitchen, at the children's drawings pinned to the wall, at the bread rising on the counter, at Lucas's worn coat hanging by the door. She thought about the life they had built, the love they shared, the family they had created. "I would do it all again," she said softly. "Every frightening moment of that escape, every uncertainty, every hardship, I would do it all again for this life with you." Lucas pulled her into his arms. "So would I. You are worth every risk, Helena. You and our children are the best thing that ever happened to me." They held each other in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and had built something beautiful from desperation and hope. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep contentment. James grew into a strong young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, allowing Lucas to slow down as his body aged. Emma, true to her independent nature, became a teacher in Silver Creek, educating the children of miners and ranchers. Daniel showed a talent for business and helped manage the financial side of the ranch. Helena watched her children grow with pride and joy. They were confident, capable people who knew they were loved, who had grown up in a home filled with respect and affection. Everything she had hoped to give them, she had managed to provide. On a summer evening in 1895, Helena and Lucas sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both in their late 50s now, graying and weathered but still strong. Grandchildren, James's two boys and Emma's infant daughter, played in the yard under their parents' watchful eyes. "Do you ever regret it?" Helena asked, not for the first time over the years. "Giving up your plans to settle down, having to run and hide, taking on another man's wife." Lucas took her hand, his grip still firm and warm. "Never, not for a single moment. You gave me a reason to live again, Helena. After Sarah died, I was just going through the motions, drifting from place to place with no purpose. Then I met you, and suddenly everything made sense again." "You saved me," Helena said, tears pricking her eyes. "I was drowning, dying inside, and you threw me a rope. You offered me escape and a fresh start when I had no hope left. You gave me everything." "We saved each other," Lucas corrected gently, "and we built this life together. Every good thing we have, we created with our own hands and hearts." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the peace that came from knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. The girl who had been trapped in a loveless arrangement was long gone, replaced by a woman who had found true love and genuine freedom. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, their family gathered on the porch. James and his wife, Emma, and her husband, Daniel, and the young woman he was courting. The grandchildren were put to bed, their sleepy protests fading into silence. The adults talked and laughed, sharing stories and making plans for the coming season. Helena looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, and her heart was full. She thought about that terrified girl who had climbed onto a horse in the middle of the night, who had ridden away from everything she knew with a cowboy she barely trusted, hoping for something better. That desperate gamble had paid off beyond her wildest dreams. She had found not just escape, but genuine happiness. Not just a fresh start, but a full, rich life overflowing with love and meaning. The cowboy who had offered his help had become her partner, her lover, her best friend. Together, they had created a legacy that would outlive them both. Lucas squeezed her hand, and Helena squeezed back, no words needed. They sat together as the night deepened around them, surrounded by their family, anchored in the home they had built, grateful for every twist of fate that had brought them to this moment. The Wild West had been harsh and unforgiving, full of danger and hardship. But it had also been a place where two people could reinvent themselves, where love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, where courage and determination could carve out happiness from nothing. Helena had been trapped, but she had been freed. She had been offered escape, and she had taken it. She had been given a fresh start, and she had made the most of it. And in the end, she had found not just survival, but joy. Not just existence, but a life truly worth living. As the moon rose over the mountains and the night sounds of the ranch settled around them, Helena closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving for the journey that had brought her here, for the love that sustained her, and for the family that surrounded her. She had escaped lovelessness and found its opposite. She had run from despair and discovered hope. And she had built, with Lucas by her side, exactly the life she had always dreamed of. Their story was not one that would be written in history books or remembered beyond their small community. But it was real and true and beautiful, a testament to the power of love to transform and redeem. Helena Irving, who had once been Helena Everett and briefly Helena Whitley, had finally become exactly who she was meant to be. And as she sat on that porch, her hand in Lucas's, surrounded by the evidence of their love, she knew that every difficult step of the journey had been worth it. The Wild West had given them both a second chance, and they had seized it with both hands. They had built something lasting from the ashes of their separate sorrows, and they would continue building, continue loving, continue living fully and joyfully until their last days. Years later, when Helena was 80 years old and Lucas 82, they would still sit on that porch together, watching sunsets and counting their blessings. They would have lived long enough to see their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They would have witnessed Silver Creek transform from a rough mining town into a proper community with schools and churches and real civilization. But through all the changes, their love would remain constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. And when people asked Helena about her life, about how she and Lucas had come to Silver Creek all those years ago, she would smile and say simply that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take a chance on hope. She never regretted taking that chance. Not when the nights were cold and the work was hard. Not when money was tight and the future uncertain. Not ever. Because Lucas had offered her escape and a fresh start, but more importantly, he had offered her love, and that love had made everything else possible. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the legacy they built lived on through their children and grandchildren and the generations that followed. The ranch they started continued to thrive, a testament to their hard work and determination. The love they shared became the foundation for a family tree that spread and flourished, giving life to dozens of people who carried forward the values Helena and Lucas had instilled. On a quiet autumn morning in 1902, Lucas passed peacefully in his sleep, Helena holding his hand. She mourned deeply, but she did not despair, because she knew how blessed she had been to spend so many years with him. She had loved him from that first desperate flight through the darkness, and she loved him still, would love him until her own last breath. Helena lived 3 more years, surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged with the world. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren, tending her beloved gardens, and writing letters to friends scattered across the West. When she died in the spring of 1905, it was peacefully in the house Lucas had built for her, in the bed they had shared for so many happy years. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch under the endless Colorado sky. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates, and below that, a single line that their children had chosen. They found freedom and love together. It was the perfect epitaph for two people who had started with nothing but hope and courage, who had built a life of meaning and joy in the Wild West, and who had proved that love, real love, could overcome any obstacle. Helena had been trapped, but she had escaped. She had been offered a fresh start, and she had made it count. And in the end, she had lived a life worth living, loved and was loved in return, and left behind a legacy that would endure long after her story faded into legend. The Wild West was many things, harsh and beautiful, cruel and generous, deadly and life-giving. For Helena and Lucas, it had been the setting for their greatest adventure, the backdrop for their deepest love, and the place where they had finally found what they had been searching for all along: each other, and the freedom to build the life they wanted together.